to this computer, and we are rolling. Everybody, listen up. We have the next podcast special guest, Jacob Strong. Super excited to have you here, man. It's been a long time since we've caught up. And the topics we're going to talk about tonight, I think, are really relevant for the world because so many people are so disconnected from nature, disconnected from their body, disconnected from their life and purpose. And so we're really going to rewild them. We're going to put out the lasso and kind of pull them back in towards their purpose, life, and embodiment, which is what you're all about. So thank you so much for jumping on, man.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd love to share the story of how we met. We connected through my Broth Night community event in Sydney that would have been over a year ago now. And Jacob came and shared this concept of long body, which was our health as an extension of nature. And if we're not really connected and looking after nature, we can't truly be healthy. And it really resonated with me. And so I thought, hey, why don't we interview you for the podcast? And so for those who don't know Jacob, he's a holistic lifestyle coach. He uses movement and embodiment practices to help people move better, live better, and create lasting personal change. He grew up in the suburbs of Western Sydney and found himself dissatisfied with the life path he had been on and conditioned to pursue, eventually leaving Australia in order to travel and discover who he actually was and what life was about for him. He now lives in Portugal with his partner, and they run their own business, holistic health and lifestyle practices, whilst focusing on living more naturally. One of the fundamental principles of their work is about how they can live harmoniously with themselves, each other, and the earth. And so we're going to talk about how to live a tox-free life. We're going to talk about the long body, which is a Native American principle, philosophy. We're going to be talking about the human predicament, how we actually transition living in this unnatural world. How do we integrate these natural, healthy practices, and a whole bunch more. So I'm really excited for this. And I'd love just to start with, dude, just how did you get into this, and tell us your story.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to cut to the key points. It's been a bit of a long journey. As you mentioned, I grew up in the suburbs of Western Sydney, and kind of growing up, I only had a few visions or a few possible paths that I could see that my life could take. Probably many people are familiar with this idea of go to university, get a job, get a house, start a family, sign on to working on that job for the next 30, 40, 50 years of your life. And what I found was that I came in with good intentions in that journey. I studied civil and environmental engineering, and I thought that would be this ticket for me to, well, help the environment, to give back to the planet, as well as earn some good money. And I was kind of disillusioned, I think, as I entered the profession and started working. I discovered that role was essentially just finding ways to exploit the environment in a way that's conducive to the policies that we write. So it was still tearing down the trees, building new housing estates, destroying natural ecosystems, but doing so in a way that it was legal or that was in alignment to policy. So really at that point in time, I was falling into, the typical pleasures and distractions of our culture, and not finding myself too happy or satisfied with where I was. Something in my body, something was telling me and screaming at me that this wasn't right. This wasn't the way that I was meant to live. So for me, what that meant was that I had to make some radical life changes. Basically, turn it all in, leave my job, and go traveling. So it's the beautiful thing about traveling is that it really opens you out to discovering who it is that you really want to be. So every time that I would journey to a new place, I could, I guess, ask myself the question again, well, who am I? And who am I to introduce to these new people that I'm being acquainted with? And over a period of time of that journey, I was really perplexed at actually who I was, who I thought I was. And it brought up a big question mark on that part of myself. It inspired a little bit of a deep journey, which went through movement and embodiment practices such as yoga, meditation, reading a lot of texts and philosophies, trying to, I guess, connect to something that was a little bit deeper inside of me. And that in turn inspired me to make some radical changes. And I think the two that are probably the most relevant for this conversation is the works that I did through the movement and embodiment practices. It was through that self-awareness that I gained of myself that I could see, that I could become aware of the distorted scripts that I was running, the ways that I wasn't living congruently with that inner nature of myself. I was running scripts that I'd been conditioned to take on. And through that self-awareness, I was able to observe those things. I was able to observe the patterns that were repetitively taking place in my life. And I was able to intervene and make some changes along that process. So I began to progressively, slowly, and as a continuing journey, to continually re-script and realign myself back to the person that I wanted to be. I like to also think of the metaphor of this as the spine, and in our alignment. If you imagine as you're standing and you're lengthening through the spine, you notice that you're never quite remaining still. There's this constant sway of the body as the weight shifts forward, the weight shifts back, and this sense of alignment is actually a verb. It's a process of coming out of and coming back into alignment. It's an active process. It's not this static, stationary thing. And I like to use that as a metaphor for living in my own alignment. Alignment for me in my own personal life is not something that's static. It's constantly evolving, it's shifting, it's changing. There's moments that I'm coming out of alignment, and there's moments that I become aware of that and reshift back into alignment. So that process in itself was a real rich experience for me, to know that I didn't always have to necessarily live to a particular alignment or remain static in that process. I could have this fluidity to move in and out. And that freedom that I felt from that allowed me to, I guess, realize and live out my purpose, or begin that journey. I'm still on that journey to really find that purpose and to continue to live it and bring it and serve other people with it. I think another key point on this journey for me was that it enabled me to reconnect with my life support systems. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of our cities, our suburbs, is that we're so disconnected from those things that sustain us, water sources, trees that are distant. The food that we eat comes from distances far away, particularly in Sydney. Everything is grown outside of Sydney and transported into Sydney, where it's distributed, and then we consume it. The way that our waste is managed. So there's all these systems, I guess, that support us are kind of far from us. And one of the things that I became curious as I was traveling was to reconnect to some of these things. It took me through permaculture, regenerative agriculture, living on the land, growing my own vegetables, learning about the different types of trees and ecosystems and how animal and plant systems work together, and really tuning into, in the process, not just the external nature, but kind of learning something about my own inner nature, which I'm sure we're gonna bring this all into some context with some of these philosophies that we're gonna talk about today.
Sure, and I love your story, man. It's so relevant. It's so prominent in my life at the moment. I'm living in Brisbane at the moment here, and you guys can probably see the lights here. These are other people's apartments that are reflective, so I'm not talking too loud. But growing up near the beach, And then transitioning here to Brisbane, I can just feel there's a different energy. There's just a different feel around more of the city. And it's not even a city, it's a very small suburb, but there is that knowing. And my partner and I is just like, we feel there's this lack of connection. And every time we go to Noosa or the Gold Coast, we go to the, fresh water spring or the beach, and it's just like, this is amazing. The body is just so recharged naturally, and we need less food. We need less of everything. We're so much more connected. And so tell us, how does someone start to reconnect? How did you start to reconnect? And I'd love to know this kind of philosophy of the long body, because, and yeah. So let's start with that. How did you start reconnecting, and how can people start reconnecting to their body and nature and that natural flow that we've so forgotten?
Yeah. So it actually began for me quite accidental. I found myself living in Portugal some years back, and I was living in the south of Portugal, near to where the beach is and all the surf is, and I was more living in a village slightly inland. And in this village was kind of a center of housing surrounded by agricultural land that was tended by the people that resided in the village. And the neighbors would often see us in the streets or on the road, and just offer us their excess produce. Here, have a melon, have some peppers, have some zucchini, have some cucumber, have some figs. There's such an abundance that was growing around that there was this sharing dynamic between this community, which, to even use the word community some in the modern age is kind of a little bit tainted, but this was literally just a village of people that interacted together on a regular basis, shared their excesses, helped each other out, and I guess lived in a way that was a little bit closer to what village life might have been, and certainly what I had never experienced in my life. So it really sparked a question in me at that time of, well, where does my food come from when I'm in Sydney? Like I have no connection to that. I have no connection to the suppliers or the growers. I have no connection to the people even in my neighborhood to know if there's any sharing or collaboration. So for me, that was, when I came back from Portugal and I came back to Australia for a period, I was researching these things, how to grow food, community, and it led me to permaculture. It was the top thing on the Google search, which was an incredible journey, and I highly recommend anybody that has a curiosity of these things just to search and research permaculture, get involved in a local project. It can really open your eyes. But even then, I guess, to bring it back in towards the long body. So the long body is a concept that one of the key influences in my work, a man by the name of Frank Ferencik, he adapts this phrase, which is taken from the Native American Iroquois people. It basically speaks to that deep connection between the self and the context, or the land, the tribe, the community. And he makes a very beautiful adaptation in his book, The Beautiful Practice and the New Old Way. And he connects these ideas of mind, body, spirit, land, tribe, and ancestry. And when I first came into touch with this philosophy, with this term, something just really clicked into place for me. It was I was torn between a couple of different worlds, this movement and embodiment, personal change work world on one side, and this working with nature, regenerative living, going back to those life support systems. And this idea of the long body really just brought everything together for me. It was really seeing the world through a new lens, a lens that I hadn't really been necessarily aware of, but once I was introduced to it, it was a lens that was what I was now observing the world through. It was a paradigm shift. Something deep inside me shifted. So basically, it speaks of the connection of the individual to its context. And when we think about this idea of individualism, we get stuck treating an individual on an individual basis. This culture has a pattern of breaking things down into parts. So when we consider the individual, we look at it, let's say the health and wellness industry, we look at the individual and what is happening in that individual's body. More and more lately, we're connecting that body and the mind stuff to see, okay, well, this individual is more than just a physical body. There's also a psychological body that's present here and it's influencing. But how often do you go to a doctor and do they ask you, well, what is your environment? How connected are you to your life support systems? What's your tribe doing in support of you? When really we're not just these individuals, we exist within a broader context. And this context has such a powerful influence on us, on the way that we perceive the world, on our behaviors, on our actions. So the long body is really this idea that I am continuous with my life support systems. I am continuous with my environments, with my tribe, with my ancestry or culture. They reside in me as much as I reside in them. So there's a few ways, I guess, that we can look at this, and a few lenses that we can take. That I like to bring in some examples here to give this concept a little bit of juice. And if we look at, say, the transfer of energy, for example, the classic example is the breath. I breathe in oxygen, I breathe out CO2. Trees breathe in CO2, breathe out oxygen. We are involved in this cycle, this circle, and this flow of energy between us. If we look at the nutrient cycle, I'm literally taking things that are in my environment, consuming those things, taking that energy within me, processing that energy, and then releasing that energy back to the earth. There's a cycle and a transfer of that energy, and that what I give back to the earth eventually then becomes energy for new life in a natural system, that is. And another way that we could bring it back in is this idea of microbial life. So the big thing at the moment is the microbiome that we have that resides within each of us. We are literally hosts to an ecosystem of microbial life. We are more microbial than we are human. Actually, we have more microbial cells than what we have human cells. So these microbes in my microbiome are having nearly an equal impact on my behaviors and my actions and my thoughts and my feelings. There's this continual communication that's happening from my gut to the way that I am, the way that I am being in the world. And more recently, we're finding that this microbiome also exists in a cloud around us. Each one of us has our own unique microbiome cloud, and that we could identify the individual by taking a sample of the cloud that is around that individual. It has its unique signature that can say, well, this is Zach or this is Jacob. And then when I'm interacting with you in person, yeah, please.
Are you talking about our energetic field? Cloud?
This is actual microbial life.
This is like a cloud of microbial fart? or like smell, or like how do you, yeah.
You could put it that way. It's we're surrounded by these beings, these microbial beings that exist around us, and that when I come into contact with you, our clouds interact. It goes to the point that I am not just me, I'm also this conglomerate of ecosystem, external and internal. There's this continual dialogue and conversation that's happening. Have a look up the microbiome cloud. It's an interesting.
Wow, I never heard of this. Interesting
aspect. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest takeaways for me as well from this long body's experience, this long body philosophy, is this idea of the circles. And as I said, Frank Franchik draws this beautiful diagram of a circle with the outside words of mind, body, spirit, land, tribe, and ancestry, really placing us all equal in this circle, which is so different to the model that we see our society currently promoting, which is more that triangular hierarchical model. This idea that at the top, perhaps there's God, and then there's humans, then there's animals, and there's plants, then there's everything else. And that's I guess one of the objectives is to get to the top of the hierarchy, even amongst our social structures. How high can we climb on that hierarchy?
Yeah.
But this hierarchical model is really at the root of so much of our suffering. It promotes the competition that we see in day-to-day life. It promotes this idea of scarcity, that there's not enough to necessarily go around and to be shared, and that we need to compete for what limited resources are out there, what limited finances out there, what limited opportunities are out there.
Mm.
On the opposite side, we have the circular model, this holistic, connected model where abundance is the mentality, where we promote cooperation, working together, unity, connectiveness. So really, to make a shift towards this idea of the long body, this wisdom that was held by the indigenous peoples of Native America, it's to really have a paradigm shift in how you operate and integrate with the world. And I should also say, it's not just a philosophy that was held by that one indigenous tribe. There is some representation of it that occurs in many indigenous tribes around the world, in Eastern philosophies as well.
Of course, there must be other tribes as well. And so does this change from continent to continent? Like, I love this as a concept. How can people start to actually utilize this in their own life?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's I guess it's at the heart of what my partner and I are trying to explore, and it's becoming close to a life work, I believe, how to live in alignment with this idea of the long body, or as we put it, to live harmoniously with ourselves, with each other, and with our earth. So it's not a simple answer to give, but I guess I'll begin to unpack. Firstly, it takes an awareness of the paradigm that you're currently running, whether it's one of competition or one of cooperation. We can then what I like to do is work on these individual aspects, the body, the mind, the spirit, land, tribe, and ancestry, and see how we can, I guess, come back to a more natural way of existing with these different aspects. So, for example, with the body, presently we find ourselves treating the body as a bit of a machine, something that's we can submit and
cause and effect.
Yeah. Look, I think I want to rewind just a little bit here, and I want to introduce this idea of the human predicament, because I think that this will lead in nicely to how we can rewild ourselves, our bodies, sure, our minds. So I want to kind of bring this piece in first. So perhaps if we could just take a moment to run through a little contemplation, and that is that our bodies are these ancient primal beings. We've been existing in this ancient primal body for the last 200 to 300,000 years. Some estimates have us at 200,000. Some estimates go as close to 300,000 years of being Homo sapiens. Beyond that, we spent 6 to 7 million years as hominids. Beyond that, several hundreds of millions of years existing in the forms of primates, mammals, reptiles, fish, vertebrates, and then invertebrates. Millions and millions of years of evolution to come to the point of where we are as today as being Homo sapiens. So we've spent longer in our evolutionary history existing as fish, as mammals, as primates, as in far more time in those forms than what we have spent in human form. And if we look at the last 200 to 300 years, what do we notice that's different perhaps about the environment, the context that we find ourselves in now compared to the environment and context we found ourselves in for the majority of our evolutionary history, the majority of that big history? That big history, we found ourselves living in close harmony with our environment, with our habitat. We were evolving delicately in a process that was in response to slight environmental shifts, and then our evolution in itself results in environmental shifts occurring as well. So there's this real dialogue between the individual and its habitat. So really the relationships between all of the individuals, all the individual animals, the plants, the trees, the habitats, the life support systems, all existing in this beautiful, harmonious existence. Fast forward to today, the last 200 to 300 years, and we find ourselves living in cities predominantly. We are what they call the indoor generation. We spend 90% of our time living indoors. And I would hazard a guess that if many of the listeners were to look out the window, it would be very hard to find anything to describe as habitat, let alone natural. So this ancient body has now found itself thrust into an environment that is alien and foreign to its very being. And it really is at the heart of so much of our suffering, this mismatch that we find, the mismatch between our body and the habitat through which it resides, or I guess the city in which it resides now. So part of what I work with in using movement and embodiment practices is discovering how we can re-naturalize our bodies, re-naturalize our lifestyles, so that we can become more human, or become more like the human animal that we, evolved to be. And this then, I guess, starts to link into, we can combine these ideas of looking at the context that we find ourselves in now, and looking at the context that we were evolved to thrive within, and seeing if there's a way that we can bridge this gap to perhaps develop practices, ideologies, ways of being, habits that can somehow bring us the best of these both worlds. It's not like we should return back to a Paleolithic way of living. I think that there was many great aspects of the paleo, but I think in terms of modernity, I like being able to, I enjoy not having to fear for my death if I get an infection, and I enjoy not having to go hunt and forage for my food every day. I enjoy being able to go down the street and buy a loaf of bread if I'm hungry. I enjoy having options available to me. There is some things that modernity offers that are, fantastic, and I don't think we should get rid of.
Yeah, like the internet and YouTube to share podcasts.
I mean, yes, if I could keep YouTube, yes, for sure, that would be on the on my list. So we have certain aspects of the modern that are great, and certain aspects of the paleo which we know that we evolved to thrive within. So how can we bridge that gap, meet in the middle? We could call this not the new way and not an old way, but somewhere in between, a new old way, perhaps. And I look at this midpoint, or this bridging the gap, in terms of those different aspects of the long body. So if we start with the body, perhaps, and we look at what was the typical situation or the context of the body in the paleo. Well, there was loads of movement variability. We spent most of our time outdoors, navigating through various terrain. We evolved somewhere on the edge of a forest and a savanna. So there was aspects of living in a forest, climbing trees, as well as aspects of living in a savanna. So running a long distance, for example. We were predominantly upright at that time, but we were also known to locomote using our hands when we're navigating through this jungle or forest environment. So we can look at the paleo, and then we can look at what occurs now. And we find ourselves very much sedentary, in the sense that we don't move around so much. We spend the majority of our time these days sitting, laying, or standing. And the sitting that we do is actually spent most of the time in a chair. So our spines never receive the nutrient of movement, the nourishment of movement, to articulate in various ways. Our hips rarely bend beyond 90 degrees. And we find ourselves suffering so many chronic complaints from a lack of an ability to move. As I mentioned before, we spend most of our time indoors, and the time that we do get to go outdoors, we're walking on the flat surfaces of the paths in our local parks. We're not really getting that various movement through terrain. We're insulating ourselves in our homes, also in our clothing and in our footwear. So there's so many things that have shifted. So then we can look at, well, okay, what are the kinds of things that we could do to meet somewhere in the middle of this? And this idea, I've been using lately the terms either re-naturalizing or rewilding. I'm kind of liking rewilding. It's a term that's getting a lot more headline attention when we speak about,
I like it.
When we speak about the native or natural landscapes, what should we be, how can we help those natural landscapes? Well, we can allow them to go back to nature, to be rewilded, to repopulate the trees. It has so many benefits for our climate, for our health, for our ecosystem. So I like this idea of bringing rewilding to the body. Okay, well, how can I rewild myself? And there's a few practices that I work with nearly every client that comes to see me. And for me, it's starting with practices that can be integrated into our everyday life, that we're going to sustain, that we're going to be able to continue to do over a period of time. And things that are so easy to do. And a few things that I tell every client, for example, just spend more time sitting on the floor. So for an extra 20 to 30 minutes a day, get off the sofa, get off the couch, and sit on the floor a little bit more. So it could be while you're watching Netflix, it could be while you're reading a book, it could be while you're working on your laptop. But that sitting off the floor immediately forces you to take a different posture, a different configuration of your hips, of your knees, of your feet, a different relationship to gravity, a different sense of support beneath you. So this is a practice that, you can start with 20 to 30 minutes. I now permanently live on the floor. I'm taking this interview sitting on the floor on a cushion right now. And
what about a stand-up desk?
The stand-up desk, I like stand-up desks as well, but it's still one of those same three positions. It doesn't create so much, yes, it gets you to stand up, of course, so you're not sitting, then you're standing. But I would also encourage, what about a squat desk where we can work down in squat, or sitting cross-legged on the floor? A desk that not only goes up, but then comes down to the ground as well.
I like that. I find myself a lot of the time sitting at the coffee table with the couch and the coffee table, and sitting down between the couch and the coffee table. So the table's like here, and then I either eat there or I do some work, and it's more just like, and I've got to stand for my laptop because like my neck can get sore, like all this, as you're saying, I'm adjusting my posture and my spine just as you're talking about this as well. So I think it's an excellent reminder. Yeah, these are good. What else? What else? What are some other ways?
Yeah, I think the other fantastic thing about the floor sitting practice is that, you sit here for, 5 minutes in one position, and your body starts to tell you, I'm uncomfortable. And you're forced to then, okay, well, now I need to shift my position. And you sit here for another few minutes, and then your body says, I'm now a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, well, I'll shift my position again, and then again. So over time, we don't want to ignore this impulse to move. When the body gives the signal to move, then that is the opportunity to take that movement and to shift, and to give your body a new posture and a new way of being. So as an extension to that, another practice I bring in is finding natural resting positions. So this could be the squat, could be things like just laying down on the floor with your knees bent as well. I like the squat because it's so versatile. I can take a quick rest while squatting, while waiting at the bus stop, for example, or while I'm waiting in a queue at the post office, which seems to everybody be queuing outside 1.5 meter spacing at the moment. So plenty of opportunity to find a squat there. So finding ways that we can rest in natural positions like the squat, which are very powerful. Another thing that I really like is just introducing into your day what I call movement snacks. And movement snacks is basically, you might schedule into your phone an alarm for every 15, 20 minutes. So you're working on your computer, Zach, and you're sitting there, your alarm goes off and you go, okay, it's a movement snack, a movement break, get up, do some articulations of the spine, maybe move through some stretches that you enjoy. Just find some kind of movement here. Even if you can, get outdoors just for that brief moment, get a breath of fresh air. It can be really fantastic to introduce this habit of getting up every 15 and 20 minutes. Go get a drink of water, go to the restroom. Just take those breaks from prolonged focus. And these breaks, these snacks will help you focus in the long term.
I think that's awesome. That is so good. Of course, sitting down. What do they say? Sitting down is the new smoking. And as you were there, I did a little search of the indoor generation. I was like, we spend 90% of our time indoors without enough daylight or fresh air, and there's 5 times more toxins and pollutants indoor than there is outdoors, most cases. And we're sitting down, we're not moving around. It's something that we don't really consider when we think of health, but our neck challenges, our lower back challenges. People are going, we're going either sitting down all day at work. I'm working from home, or then going to the gym and then kind of smashing yourself at the gym and then doing these crazy movements. And it's like, of course, there's going to be more injury. There's going to be more, I guess, damage to the body as well. So it's, this snack movement idea is fantastic.
Yeah. For me, it's been something that's really, it's shifted a lot. And over time, you start to build these things as part of, I guess, your daily practice. And I don't like the idea of the daily practice being restricted to just that 1 or 2 hours that you do in the beginning of the day. You wake up, you do your breath work or your meditation, you have a stretch, you have a tea, and that's your practice. Well, the reality is that in every moment we are practicing something, whether it's conscious or unconscious. The way that our bodies respond to the demands that we impose, it's the SAID principle, the specific adaptation to imposed demand. It's how our bodies learn and adapt over time. And whatever you're doing in any given moment, whatever you're practicing, is how your body adapts. So if I'm practicing sitting on a couch for 7 hours a day, then my body is going to adapt to that. If I'm practicing sitting at an office desk for 8 hours a day, my body is going to adapt to that. If I'm introducing movement every 15 to 20 minutes throughout my day as a break, as an interval, as a change, my body will respond in kind. And in the beginning, when you bring these things in, we don't want to go too extreme to really shock our nervous systems and shock our body and make something that's not really sustainable. I like to bring in these practices incrementally. So start with an extra 20 minutes or one episode of Netflix sitting on the floor. Start with a break every 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then slowly introduce more variability into your day. Slowly work it in and find something that works for your individual unique circumstance as well.
For sure. Yeah, looking at where we're sitting down, what our movements are throughout the day, and then analyzing them and say, how can I mix this up? How can I keep this different? I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think another interesting way to bring in into our rewilding process, we've spoken a little bit about the body, but we can also speak about some of these other aspects. So one that comes to mind, is the mind, and worth talking about, I think, in relation to stress. I think stress is a very big buzzword these days, and everybody's concerned about stress and stress relieving practices and how they manage stress in their lives. Firstly, to say that not all stress is bad stress. There is productive, promoting, positive stress that stimulates growth. If, for example, if we look at, say, the tissues of a muscle, and I want to grow that particular muscle, I need to create a little bit of stress on that muscle for it to then adapt and grow. There's an adaptation to the demand that I'm imposing. What becomes problematic is when that stress tips over beyond, I guess, the point at the top of the curve, the point where the stress is at its maximum, and then we go over and we start to come down the other side, and stress starts to have negative impacts on our life. And this is where we kind of get into the realm of chronic stress, where stress is sustained over such a long period of time. So if we look back to this idea of, well, what was stress like in the paleo? And the way that would have unfolded is, as a tribe, we would have gone out into the wild to go hunting, to go foraging, and the stress would have come in a very acute way. There would have been this moment of high intensity, high energy, where the sympathetic nervous system fires, all the blood rushes to the limbs, and we're ready to fight, flight. We can take the action, we can make the hunt, we can take the kill, we can avoid that saber-toothed tiger, or we can get away from that tiger lurking in the bush behind us. And then we come back to our tribe, to our camp, and drop into that parasympathetic state, really ground, really earth, be surrounded by the rest of our tribe, by our support networks, by the nourishment that we can get from the food that we have, the water, the just really settling in and recovering. And there would have been this back and forth motion of that sympathetic parasympathetic state, really well adapted for the paleo. Now we fast forward to the modern world, and we find that that tiger that's lurking in the woods behind us seems to be ever present. Could be in the form of our boss, our jobs, social media, our mother-in-law. There's always a tiger that's lurking in the woods somewhere that really raises our stress levels and keeps us in this state, this chronic sympathetic nervous system state. So it's really now a maladaptive part of our being. But remembering that it did have its use, and it does have its use, so it's not to completely throw away this process. So how can we find a way to regulate our stress levels? And I think there's so many practices that are available that are useful to integrate. Things such as just regulating your breath. It's so easy to drop back into the parasympathetic state. I'm sure Zach, you've probably had much experience with different breathwork techniques. Well, there's a plethora of them out there.
That's the thing. There's so many different types, and obviously breathing in and out is one of them, but there's different styles of that. What is, from your understanding, the best way to just relax the body with a simple breathing technique? Is there something people can take home today from, I've heard the breathe in a certain amount, breathe out a lot. Are we breathing in too much? Are we breathing out enough? What is is there a perfect formula to relaxing? But I think that, if people could really have a really simple formula on getting back into that practice, as you said, that morning routine or that evening routine to relax, moving the body around, but also knowing that every moment is a practice. We're practicing something, whether we're practicing stress or fear or worry, or we're practicing joy and gratitude or relaxation. It's a choice. So how do we breathe better?
Sure. So for me, the first key thing here is an awareness of the breath and what that breath is in any given moment. So when I find myself kind of in, I guess, slightly disconnected to my body, I will tune in, or maybe I'm feeling a rush of emotion or anxiety or stress I'll tune into, well, what's my breath doing now? And just that first moment of tuning in and checking in with what the breath is actually doing can be enough to already start to shift the state. Now, if I find myself in a situation where maybe I can't take a few minutes out, maybe I'm in the middle of a meeting or in the middle of a podcast or in the middle of a scenario where I can't really take a couple of minutes for myself, I'll get a sense of the points of contact that I have between myself and my seat of support. So the ground or the floor beneath me, really tuning into where I can feel those points most clearly in my awareness. And I'll get a sense of what my breath is doing now. And that might already be enough to start a process of deregulating ourselves. Now, in those moments where we do have the time to practice, it is beneficial to use that time to work with the breath. So when we find ourselves in a scenario where we do not have that time allocation, we can drop in to that state a little easier. So again, for me, it begins when I do have that time. It begins first with an awareness of how I'm breathing presently. And I would say, generally, I say that we want to create a focus on the exhalation here. So breathing through the nostrils, of course, is important. But if we have a focus on the exhalation and then allowing the inhalation to come, that is the really, really easy way to regulate and drop ourselves down into that parasympathetic state. Now, for the people that like numbers or a count, the most simplest one is 5 seconds in and 5 to 7 seconds out. For me, that's just such a simple, easy technique that will, after a couple of minutes of that, adrenaline drops, I'm able to feel a little bit more grounded. I feel a little bit more centered, feel more supported where I am. Such a simple formula to use in our breathwork practice. Of course, there's many other different techniques, and I think the best way, if there's a curiosity in breathwork and how breathwork can regulate this stress that we hold, just try them. For everybody, the slightly different effect. So what I encourage is to try a few different types of breath, but really tune in with your awareness. Start in the beginning with, how do I feel now? Physically, mentally, emotionally, what's my state? Go through the breathwork practice and then tune in again at the end. What has shifted? What's different now compared to then? And really get a sense of what that particular practice did for you in that moment. I think this is the best way that we come to, I guess, know what techniques or what patterns or what breath work really works for us as an individual. This is the same applies for the movement practices. A tuning in with an awareness before and a tuning in with your awareness after. What has shifted? What has this particular practice done for me? How do I feel? I think by noticing the differences in our experience, this is when we really start to learn something of ourselves, to learn something about how to regulate our own individual beings, as well as, participate more in this experience of the long body.
This is really important. This is really important. And as you're describing all this, I'm like, I'm following along too. I'm like, I forget to breathe sometimes. I'm so focused, or I'm just moving through life. And yeah, I think the breath is number one to come back to that. And as you said, it's just that awareness, and your body can self-correct. Your body will feel into it first. And I think, yeah, starting with our own answers from within is number one. And then going, okay, cool, where I'm at. Okay, maybe I'll try the 5 seconds in, 7 seconds, 5 to 7 seconds out, and I'll try this on. And I think, yeah, figuring out our own method is part of the process too, right? Because there's no one thing that helps all the time. But I do know that breathing is definitely something that will help most of the time. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's what I look for with these practices for sustainability and longevity is how we can integrate it into our lives. And one thing that you're doing in every moment is breathing. So it's a little bit of a switch from subconscious breathing to consciously breathing for a moment. It's so easy to bring that into something that we're already doing. The same with the floor sitting, the same with the resting. These things we're already doing. It's just to do it in a different way that is more, I guess, conscious and connected back to that natural way that we were to do things. One other, I guess, so we've spoken a little bit about the body, a little bit about the mind, but if we could also just briefly touch on the land or the nature aspect. For me, this is one of the richest parts of this experience. And if we really take this long body idea as not just a metaphor, but at the literal reality of which we exist, that's I am not just my short body, this mind, body, spirit. We have this kind of fascination with the self, and even the wellness industry, the self-care and personal development industry really focuses on mind, body, spirit, and takes that as the individual self. Not often, as I mentioned before, do we look at the broader context of which we exist within. The land, our community or tribe, and our cultural ancestry. So really, if we look at this context, our life support systems, the things that we are intimately integrated with, as also integrated to our health, then the implication here is that the health of the land is directly connected to my own health. The health of my community, my tribe, is directly connected to my own health. The health of my culture is directly connected to my own health. My health is not just an individual isolated thing. It's part of a bigger context. So I can never be truly healthy unless my context, my long body is healthy. My short body, I can do as much work on my short body as possible. But if I forget my long body, I'll never quite achieve the full health that I'm trying to, or the full expression of health that I'm trying to look for. So the implication here is this idea of one health, or I've also heard it coined planetary health, that the health of nature, the health of of our environment is intimately connected to our health as humanity. And I see really the point for me of accumulating health, of being healthy, of becoming the best version of myself, to do the personal development work for myself, is that I can then be of better service to my long body. I see the point of our health really to give that health away for notable causes, for causes that are going to make a better future for humanity. So for me personally, when I'm doing all these, say, movement practices, embodiment practices, focusing on becoming the best person that I can, I then know that when I want to go out and really, say, go out to reforest a landscape and give that help, I can do that without thinking about my practice or those things that are involved in my day-to-day personal development. I can let that go for a period of time because I can give that away to serve that particular cause. And that might be a social justice cause, that might be an environmental cause, but really working to serve that cause. And I think it's important that we also don't get stuck in that phase. So we see people or activists that get stuck speaking or serving environmental causes or social justice causes that are really, I guess, not doing their own bodies and their own health justice. They get stuck in this realm of serving that they forget themselves in the process. And likewise, we have people that are really stuck in this bubble of self-development, self-improvement, a continual process of needing to clear trauma or needing to find my purpose or needing to change my negative habits. That stuff is valuable for sure, but serving is also equally valuable. In the service, there is purpose. In the service, there is a process of your own healing. So it's how can we do both of these things in a way that is balanced, in a way that works for our individual selves, in a way that we can work on ourself to become, I guess, independent, so that we can then connect to that interdependent reality that we exist within.
Blowing my mind here, dude. Of course, it's like, oh my God, of course we're going to be doing this stuff. We've got the movement, we've got the movement for the body, we've got the breath for the mind, we've got the reconnection back to nature, which is just reconnecting back to ourselves and having our own, it's going to be different for everyone because they're going to be in different parts of the world, in different times, you might have 5 minutes. I say to people, 5 minutes, just go and see the sun, in the morning, have that glass of water, like just do these little things, build on these little habits. And eventually, people look at probably what you do and what we do and what I do, and like, oh my God, how do you make time for all this stuff? How do you, but it's my belief that if we strip back all the stuff that we're doing throughout the day and just keep it really simple processes, really fulfill us, keep us healthy, keep us happy, we don't have to overcomplicate it. And so I love that you're just keeping it really simple here and giving a really nice reminder to people. I'd love to know, was there any more that you needed to add on that?
I guess the point that I would just bring in here, just to finish off that thought process, is that to really, there are two ways, I guess, that we can kind of interact, that I see it with nature, with the outdoors. And one is to firstly go out there, go outdoors, connect to the life support systems, go plant some trees, go learn about where your food comes from, go to the farms, go to the local rivers, go take a swim in the ocean, really get out and spend more time outdoors, and not just in outdoor-like spaces, like curated parks and things like that, but really places that have got a little sense of wildness to them, something that's a little bit raw. But then the other side of things, we can look indoors. We can look at how we exist in our indoor spaces, taking into consideration that we spend 90% of our time indoors on average. How can we bring nature back indoors? What are the things that we can bring inside, and how can we nourish our indoor spaces with things like plants, with things like, water, as you said, fresh filtered water, perhaps, natural organic foods. I see you've got your blue light blocking glasses on. So how can we re-naturalize the lighting within our homes? If we need to use screens, we can use glasses such as what you're using, Zach, or we can bring in more natural lighting like candlelight. We can bring some natural imagery around the house, surround ourselves with natural textures such as woods, such as natural materials, natural clothing, and at the same time removing some of those unnatural elements, the things that are not so necessary to have around us, that are promoting an unnatural, part of our environment.
I think what I've noticed recently living here in Brisbane is there's more man-made sounds, whether there's sirens, whether there's construction, whether there's doors closing, like there's more man-made sounds and less crickets, less birds, like there's just less, and that's fine. But it's interesting to see how that's impacting my nervous system. Is that putting me in that stress response, or is it allowing me to rest more? Because going up to Noosa, a couple of hours north from here in Brisbane, I just felt so like this Airbnb we had was so in the bush. It was literally in the trees. It was like you could see the tree tops here from the bedroom. It was just like we were in a tree house. It was really cool. And I just noticed that waking up was so serene, so peaceful, like opening the door, the blinds and the sling. It was raining as well at the time. It was like that. So those sounds of rain, nature, insects, none of these man-made frequencies and things that are there, I feel they've had a massive impact on my health. And but not a massive, but I can imagine we can adapt to it. But it's having those moments when you're saying really present to what's around you, and breathing into that and having that awareness of like, okay, actually, yeah, maybe I could, when my first ever office job was a year and a half ago. And I would always put on the sound of nature on Spotify. And I was always putting on something natural because I was like, that sound in an office, you just don't get that in an office. And so, as you said, we have to kind of buffer and recreate. Nothing's going to be as good as nature, but if you are living in a man-made structures, the lighting, the air conditioning or whatever it is for you, just mixing that up. It's not just food and exercise anymore, guys. Like we have to see health from a totally different perspective. Yeah. I'd love to know.
For sure.
You go.
I was just going to say, I mean, we can look at it from the aspects of our own homes, but we can expand that idea to the suburbs that we live in, the cities that we live in, the world that we live in. I spend a lot of time focusing on what we can do as individuals because, well, that's where our real power is. It's right in the center of what we can influence and how we can make a real change within our own lives and our immediate lives. But if this way of thinking is something that could be expanded onto a societal level, well, I mean, imagine a world where we weren't focused on hierarchies and competition, but we were focused on the interconnectedness of all things and abundance and cooperation as a foundation for society. I could see that could be pretty powerful.
Just imagine. I think that isn't something we need to wish for, that one day the whole world is going to be like that. We need to live that now in the microcosm of our own existence, and that can hopefully ripple out. Jacob, I'd love to know if you could, this is a random question, if you could send a text message to every single person's phone right now with one message or quote or insight or word or letter or whatever it is, or image, what would you want to send everyone's phone right now to just to be like, oh, and you had their attention? I'm really curious.
Sure. The first thing that came to mind was actually a quote from Tony Riddle, who's the natural lifestylist based over in London. And it really resonates with me. I think it's quite powerful. He says, we can't all go back to live in nature, but we can learn to live more naturally. And I think that kind of summarizes a lot of what we're about here, this idea of just returning back to what is natural for your body, for the philosophies that guide us as a society and as individuals. So yeah, I think that would be what I would send out. One sentence is quite tough though, Zach.
Pressure. But this has been super insightful, Jacob. Thank you so much for your time. This is, if anything, a reminder, a warning, a message of hope for people. If you're out there, as you know, we all have gone through struggling times, to reach out. Jacob, I know that you have some online support and website and Instagram and Facebook and everything for everybody. If you just want to kind of let us know how we can connect with you, and I think you have an event or course coming up. Love to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, over the past few months, it's been quite over in Portugal. We're still in lockdown. So a lot of my work, I've shifted from face-to-face and in person. I've finally come to the table to bring it more into an online offering, which is actually really exciting. I'm finding that we can go really deep with some of this stuff in online in a way that perhaps wasn't possible necessarily face-to-face. So there's certain opportunities and challenges associated with that. But the business that I share with my partner, my beautiful partner, Flora from Portugal, is Echo, ECHO . And our website is created by Echo. And we're basically looking at all things holistic health and lifestyle. So my partner, she is involved in traditional Chinese medicine, and I come more from the angle of movement, embodiment, and lifestyle practices. So our Facebook page, the handle is @createdbyecho, which is the same on Instagram. I'm sure you'll share the links. We have a newsletter that your listeners can subscribe to. Basically send that out every few weeks with little tidbits, ideas, videos, stories that we're currently involved in. And as part of my online offerings, I am currently launching my first online workshop next month, which is going to focus on rewilding yourself. So we're going to take some of the stuff that was spoken about today and really go into how that works practically. We're going to work through a few practices, and yeah, it should be a nice, hopefully, opening to this work online. I'm also launching a little short series called The Primal Body, and that's going to be launched in April as well, towards the end of April. And it's going to be a 3-week program where we're looking at some of the foundational aspects of movement and body awareness, so we can begin a process of rewilding. So diving a little bit deeper into the physical and the movement and the embodiment practices involved in that. For anybody that might be over Europe side, I also have a retreat that I'm co-facilitating in mid-April. It's a men's retreat, so men's only, but if anyone's in Europe and is able to get over to Lisbon, we're going to be also bringing in some of these ideas mixing it with ice bath and temazcal, so the Mexican sweat lodge. It's going to be quite an initiatory experience. And later on throughout the year, I am launching my 10-week online coaching program. So there's quite a lot of stuff happening. The best way to keep in touch is to get on to the newsletter. I'm quite responsive on that, so we can have back and forth email exchanges.
So good. So good. I really appreciate your time, Jacob, and what you guys are doing. I miss you guys. It was awesome to connect over at Broth Night, a year and a bit ago. And it's awesome to see that, you guys are living and breathing this. I know that you guys do a lot of gardening as well. Like you guys are in deep with what you talk about. And so I'm fascinated. I'd love to know a bit more. So created by Eco, here we go. Let me spell this out.
ECHO.
That's it. Created by ECHO, and on the website and Instagram and Facebook and whatnot, or the link will be around this video somewhere. So yeah, so much fun. Thank you so much for all the lessons and learnings. And everyone, please take this learning, take this message, share it with others, implement it, practice it, teach it. That's what this is all about. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jacob. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Zach. Cheers.